Okay, so let's begin. Hi, I'm Ken Stern. I'm the director of the Bard Center for the Study of Hate. I thank you all for being part of our webinar today, and I hope you all had a beginning of your new year that was excellent, and I look forward to a series of webinars over this next year with you as well. So today we're having a webinar with Joe Uscinski about hate and conspiracy theories, and I want to tell you a little bit about how I came across Joe and his work. The Bard Center for the Study of Hate is going to be publishing a book in 2024 with various different experts on hate from different fields, and I've asked them to basically taking what they know about how hatred works. If they were running an NGO, an ungovernmental organization that was focused on hatred, what would they do? What wouldn't they do? And why? To give some directions and theories to a lot of the groups that are focusing on hate. And we have people from philosophy and economics and social psychology and anthropology. Um, but I realized I needed somebody to write about conspiratorial thinking. Um, in the 90s, I had focused on and written a book about the militia movement, and the conspiracy theories were fused with their white supremacist agenda and their ideology, but it was on the fringe. And flip forward 30 years, it's much more mainstream. And I didn't really know how to think about that and what we should do about it, but I knew that was an important component of what NGOs and others should do. And I was talking to a reporter from the Spokesman Review in Spokane, who's doing a story on white supremacist groups there. And I was asking him, as I was asking everybody else, who's doing work on conspiratorial thinking? And he said, I know this guy. He quoted Joe the year before. He introduced us. I read his book, which you could still see I have all the tabs from the book on conspiracy theories. And Joe is now involved in that project, and I wanted him to talk more broadly about the subject of conspiratorial thinking, conspiracy theories, and hatred. So let me introduce him, and then what we're going to do is I'm going to disappear. Joe's going to talk for a half hour, a little more, and then we'll do a Q&A, which I will moderate. So feel free to put any questions you have in the Q&A box, even while Joe is speaking, and then we'll address those to him at the aftermath. So Joe Uscinski is a professor of political science at the University of Miami, where he studies public opinion and mass media with a focus on conspiracy theories. He's co-author of American Conspiracy Theories and the editor of Conspiracy Theories and the People Who Believe Them, both by the Oxford University Press. His textbook is Conspiracy Theories, a primer, and there's going to be a second edition of this soon. So, Joe, thank you very much for being with us, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction, and thank you for having me. Does everything look good?
Everything looks great.
Okay, great. All right, so I'm going to talk about conspiracy theories and their relationship to hate. So not all conspiracy theories are tied to hate. If somebody thinks that aliens landed in the desert of New Mexico and thinks the government might have covered it up, it's not clear that they hate anyone. Maybe they hate the idea that, they haven't been introduced to the aliens yet, but they're not really singling out much of a group in that sense. But we know that there are other conspiracy theories that really do involve hatred. Such as scapegoating groups that we dislike for whatever society's ills are. Conspiracy theories about a group could make people who adopt that conspiracy theory start to dislike that group too. So it could be going in both directions. And we know throughout history that these sorts of conspiracy theories, if we're blaming, minority groups, particularly when they are vulnerable minority groups, can end in terrible, terrible tragedy. In some ways, we could be interested in conspiracy theories if we're interested in hate, because conspiracy theories, at least some of them, could be a barometer for hatred. Right. So if we think it is the case that if conspiracy theories are becoming more and more prevalent, well, probably some of them are going to be targeting vulnerable groups and could be either responding to or driving hatred, and then potentially driving behavior based on that hatred, we'd want to know if those conspiracy beliefs are increasing across the mass public, because that would essentially suggest that bad things are going to happen, and perhaps we need to take action to stop those things from happening. So things we might want to know. I mean, are conspiracy theory beliefs increasing over time? The media keeps saying they are. Are they in fact? What's the role of conspiracy theories in driving behavior? I mean, we're obviously concerned about people acting on hate. Are people acting on their conspiracy theories, at least in a direct way? Is social media driving conspiracy theories and potentially hatred? And we'd also want to know, what's the impact of exposure, particularly on social media, and towards our behaviors that might express hatred towards other groups. So I just want to start with two case studies that I've been looking at lately. The first is white replacement conspiracy theories, which make the argument that white people are being replaced, and that this replacement is being engineered usually by wealthy, powerful Jewish people who want to get rid of white people and replace them with cheaper non-white laborers who reproduce at higher rates than white people. So this clearly targets immigrants and Jewish people. And also I want to look at what I guess we might call a new satanic panic, or a new sensationalized sex and Satan panic, which was going on quite prominently through most of 2022, where conservative leaders were accusing public school teachers, gay people, trans people, and many others of essentially grooming children into sexualized lifestyles, or being outright pedophiles or Satanists in some way, and doing terrible things to kids. So I measured belief in both of these. I'll let you in on the secret here. The results aren't great. So let's take a quick peek. So let's start with the idea that white people are being replaced. We put a couple items on a survey, national survey with 2,000 respondents last May. So the idea that powerful politicians and corporate leaders are trying to replace white people with cheaper foreign laborers, we're getting 32% agreeing or strongly agreeing. White people in Europe are being replaced, 27%. And in the last 20 years, governments discriminating deliberately against white Americans with immigration, 31%. So we've got fairly widespread belief in these ideas. When we do some statistics on these ideas and say, well, what are the personality, political, and other traits that seem to be driving these beliefs? The biggest indicator is anti-immigrant sentiment. So if you don't like immigrants, you are more likely to believe that whites are being replaced. That shouldn't come as a shocker. If you don't like the political establishment as a whole, if you have resentments towards African Americans, if you think that the United States has become too feminine in its politics, if you tend to deny authoritative accounts of information, if you have high levels of sexism, if you think our country hasn't gotten its due, if you have a need for chaos and get off on seeing things blow up, if you have elevated levels of dark tetrad personality traits like narcissism and sadism, if you have higher levels of paranoia, then you are more likely to believe in this conspiracy theory. So we're combining sort of two things: a toxic idea that targets vulnerable groups with people who are themselves usually harboring elevated levels of antisocial and toxic traits. When we look further at what beliefs go with this conspiracy theory, so what's correlated with belief in it, when we ask people if violence is called for in our politics, I am ready. That's strongly correlated with belief in white replacement conspiracy theories. And when we ask people if they've actually committed violence for a political cause, that itself is highly correlated, or fairly correlated with this. These people are also more likely to share false information, enjoy arguing, and really neat, they may want to run for political office and feel like they are qualified to do so. And also they tend to be not vaccinated for COVID-19. So that's white replacement. Here are the satanic panic and sex panic beliefs. This is going on quite a bit in the state I live in, where the governor is banning books from schools, and looks like he's soon going to do it from universities, and has made quite a big deal about teachers grooming people and drag shows grooming children. Here's one quote from Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, which sort of sums up all of these ideas into one neat package. The Democrats are the party of pedophiles, of princess predators from Disney, of teachers, elementary school teachers trying to transition their school-age children. Their identity is the most disgusting, evil, horrible thing happening in our country. You can't really say this was taken out of context, because it's pretty clear what her meaning is, and she said things similar to this over and over again. But if you look across, looking at pastors, politicians, and other thought leaders on the conservative side of things, you find quite a bit of this rhetoric during 2022. So when we put these on our May survey, we had a third of people thinking or agreeing that satanic cults secretly abuse thousands of children, that elites are engaged in sex trafficking, that there's a secret gay agenda to convert young people into gay and trans lifestyles, that Disney is trying to groom children into sexualized lifestyles, that there's satanic ritual abuse going on everywhere, and preschools and public schools are engaged in satanic practices. So these beliefs are fairly, again, widespread, and they go together quite well, statistically speaking. I will say, for both this and the white genocide beliefs, people weren't polling on these decades ago, so I can't really say how much they've gone up or gone down, and that's sort of a concern because I can't speak to trends very much, but I can say that it exists now, and that quite a few people at least say on surveys that they agree with these ideas. What goes with these Satan and sex ideas? Again, disliking the entire political establishment as a whole, having gendered views towards American politics, not believing official accounts of information, disliking experts, being personally paranoid, being a Christian nationalist, having a need for chaos, higher levels of religiosity, higher levels of dark triad traits, elevated levels of male role normativity, which is statements like gay men shouldn't kiss in public, or men should always want to have sex, or boys shouldn't play with dolls. So again, we have a whole bunch of traits that aren't particularly great that seem to be strongly associated with these particular beliefs. And if we ask again, what's sort of associated with these sorts of beliefs? Again, violence, a willingness to say that you are in favor of political violence and to say that you've committed it recently. Having higher levels of interpersonal conflict, posting a lot on social media, and again, wanting to run for office and feeling qualified to do so. So not dissimilar from the white genocide beliefs and on that front. So all those things are to me bad. We're left with these questions of, are these beliefs on the rise or not? We don't know. We have to continue polling. Even during the satanic panic of the 1980s, there wasn't a lot of good polling done. So we don't know how much people were believing these sorts of ideas then. And that keeps us from identifying the cause of the trends, because we don't know the overtime trends yet. And that is sort of hampering our ability to do anything about it at this point. So just to back out a little bit and say, well, what about conspiracy theories more generally? How about conspiracy theories as a class of ideas? It seems like those are going up because we keep being told as much in the news over and over again. Yes, I mean, it's absolutely true that we're hearing more about conspiracy theories. When I first got into the topic about a little over a decade ago, um, New York Times wasn't running a lot of articles with conspiracy theory in it. So in 2010, they had a little over 100 articles. By 2020, there was about close to 800 articles they had run on the topic. Just myself in particular, I took 300 interviews on the topic in 2020 alone. Wasn't that hard to do because obviously I wasn't commuting anywhere. So I was just sitting on the phone and computer all day. So a lot of reporting on it. What's getting reported? Trust wanes, conspiracy theories rise. From the Congo to the Capitol, conspiracy theories are surging. You're living in the golden age of conspiracy theories, according to Politico right now. So that's not good if it's true. Washington Post, will you fall into the conspiracy theory rabbit hole? I hope not. And this, again, is the Washington Post, not Cosmo, but hey, you can take the quiz and find out if you are indeed a conspiracy theorist. So what are the reported consequences of these conspiracy theories according to the media? Well, QAnon is riding the pandemic to new heights. It's driving the anti-mask phenomenon and specific acts of violence that we've seen. People are engaged in kidnappings, supposedly because of conspiracy theories. People are killing each other who believe these conspiracy theories. And so we have a lot of tragic incidents due to, or supposedly due to, these ideas. So who are the villains in the coverage? TikTok, YouTube, the internet, social media, and that our new communication technologies seem to be driving this new age of conspiracy theorizing. So now is the time, and the new communication technology is the cause. And they're pretty certain about it because the language seems to get more and more, get stronger over time. So it's not just that they're convincing people of conspiracy theories, but they're creating a dystopian nightmare. So that's not good, right? And when I said, who are they blaming as a villain? I meant it quite literally. Mark Zuckerberg, this is from The Guardian. He's a modern Bond villain, is now coming for your children. Well, if he is coming for your children, he's not getting them on Facebook because young people have been migrating away from that platform for a long, long time. According to the president, social media is killing people. That's bad, if true. And when we ask the public, what do you think is going on right now? 70% say that conspiracy theories are out of control. 60% say that people believe them now more than 25 years ago. And most people blame social media for these perceived increases. So is there a good reason for concern about all this? Absolutely. I mean, we've seen a lot of things recently that may very well frighten us. There's a lot of dubious beliefs out there. There's a lot of false information just floating around in various communication outlets. A lot of people are expressing distrust and they're scapegoating other groups for their problems. And we do see a lot of associations between dangerous actions and conspiracy theory. So good reason to investigate further. But there's also serious policy implications here when we start thinking about this. I mean, if you start regulating social media, that can decrease innovation. When you regulate markets, even online ones, you can decrease choice, you can increase prices, and you can essentially lock in monopolies rather than hinder them. And also, what's a big concern for a lot of people is that conspiracy theories are speech, and they're not necessarily false. But if we're going to get rid of conspiracy theories, then we are clearly regulating speech, and that can chill speech. It could stop us from considering ideas and talking about ideas. There could be collateral damage. There are a lot of people in my space who have had videos taken down because they talk about conspiracy theories, even though they're not trying to encourage people to believe in those theories. And it can lead to censorship. right? And what's really interesting is that what all of us consider to be a conspiracy theory varies from person to person. We all have a different definition of the term, and we all differentially decide what counts as a conspiracy theory and what counts as conspiracy fact, right? So any attempt at trying to get all this stuff off the internet, would lead us to a place where we're just picking and choosing which ideas are okay and which ones are not, often arbitrarily and for political reasons. So very quickly, why do people believe in these ideas in the first place? I would just give a very simple model, which is that there's a combination of largely stable factors that we all have to one degree or another. We have predispositions, group attachments, and personality traits, and those drive how we interpret the world. Information comes in, it gets laid over what we already believe, and it leads us to have a specific belief about the world, right? So two different people could be exposed to the same exact conspiracy theory, but because we're different people, they could come to very different conclusions about it, with one person believing it's absolutely true and the other one believing it's complete hogwash, right? So the idea that people are just exposed incidentally to an idea, automatically adopt it and then go act on it, that's a very strong claim, and one which there isn't a ton of good evidence for. Instead, people tend to interpret things based on who they are and what baggage they already carry with them. What's more is that who we are determines what information we seek out and access in the first place. So oftentimes, people who aren't into conspiracy theories aren't going to be seeking them out, and as such, they're not going to be seeing them all that much. And then even if they did see a few on their social media or wherever, they'll probably be psychologically resistant to them because they're not into those ideas in the first place. So nonetheless, the popular narrative that we see quite a bit in the news is something like this. Social media use is driving increases in conspiracy theory beliefs, which is then in turn driving increases in non-normative and dangerous behaviors. So the expectation, if we were to look at this, would be something where any conspiracy theory that I would poll on over the last few years should be going up, up, up over time, so that people are believing these ideas more and more and more. Let me just start with one well-known example, and that is Kennedy conspiracy theories. Well, only a few weeks after the assassination in 1963, there was a national poll by Gallup that asked people if it was a conspiracy or just a lone gunman that had killed the president. 50% thought it was a conspiracy. No internet or social media at that time. This belief increased to 80% by the mid-70s, floated around there until the internet era, and it's only come down back to around where it started in more recent years. So do we see evidence of increases here? Not really, and certainly not so much during the internet era. There could be a lot of idiosyncratic factors driving this particular belief, like a lot of my students nowadays say, who's Kennedy? But nonetheless, I mean, the conspiracy theory is still popular. We hear about it every November, and there's new movies and books and document releases coming all the time. So it's still in the popular imagination. Nonetheless, belief has come down significantly from where it was in the pre-internet era. At the very beginning of COVID, I was able to get a national poll out in mid-March 2020. We asked if COVID was being exaggerated to hurt President Trump in the election year. And we also asked if COVID was purposely created or released like a bioweapon to intentionally harm people. We repeated these polls over and over again throughout 2020, found no increases over time. And this was precisely during the time where we were being warned that these beliefs are going up, up, up. We then went back and polled on a bunch of other conspiracy theories and pieces of misinformation in June of 2020 about COVID, and then followed up a year later in May of 2021. And for the most part, we didn't really find increases over time. Things either stayed stable or went down between 2020 and 2021. How about QAnon, one which we've heard quite a bit about, the idea that this is spreading everywhere, it's now gone mainstream. I'm always sort of confused by the headlines about QAnon, because they say QAnon is an extreme far-right conspiracy theory, but it's also mainstream. I don't know how something can be far-right and extreme and also mainstream. But let's see what QAnon did over the last few years. So we started polling on this in 2018, shortly after it started making a lot of national headlines. And the way we did it was with a feeling thermometer. So we said, on a scale of 0 to 100, rate how much you like the QAnon movement. With closer to 0 meaning you really hate it, closer to 100 meaning you really like it. So the average was about 20 something when we started, and it's really only come down since in the years following. And this is again during the years where everyone was saying it's going up, up, up. And just to put these numbers into perspective, on that same poll in 2018, it was done in Florida. And we also put Fidel Castro on a feeling thermometer, and QAnon only barely beat out Fidel Castro. If you know anything about Florida, you know that we're not big fans of Castro here. So again, no stunning endorsement of QAnon in that. If you just ask a straight up question, are you a believer in QAnon? Yes or no? In 2019, we got about 5% of Americans saying yes, with 6% of Republicans and 6% of Democrats saying yes. Those numbers didn't change much when we asked the same question again 2 years later in 2021. Interestingly, a lot of people say this is a far-right conspiracy theory. From opinion surveys, there's not a lot of evidence that it's far-right. Right. I mean, you can ask the question in such a way that will get you more believers from the right than the left. But if you just say, are you a believer in QAnon? It's not clear that it's more people on the right than the left. And even when you do find polls where it's more believers on the right than the left, oftentimes once you account for other factors, like their psychological traits or their general disposition towards conspiracy theories, you find that partisanship and political ideology are no longer significant predictors of QAnon belief. And again, on the far right of the screen, there's JFK belief, and that should just sort of put into perspective, the amount of people who believe in JFK conspiracy theories versus QAnon. The one caveat I will give here, though, is that a lot of the beliefs that QAnon adopted into its lore existed long before QAnon. So the idea that there's massive sex trafficking or baby eaters or, a deep state, long predate QAnon. They've been around for a long, long time. You can go back to the Oliver Stone movie JFK, and the premise of that movie is that there's a pedophile deep state working against the president. That was the Joe Pesci character in that movie. So again, not much new here. We also polled on a whole bunch of other conspiracy theories and polled them the exact same way that they have been polled at some time prior in the past, in recent decades. So what we sought to do was to say, hey, listen, people have polled things in recent decades, different conspiracy theories, different pieces of misinformation. Let's re-poll all of these ideas. Let's see if they've gone up or down over time generally. Of the 37 that we polled, only 6 had increased over time. 16 had no statistically significant change, and 15 had decreased. So again, no across the board increases, and the ones that had increased weren't really the ones that anyone's freaking out about in the news media. So the average change across all these was -3 points. One thing I've also been doing for the last decade is just studying people's inclination towards conspiracy theories in the first place. Are they just generally disposed to that sort of logic? And we do that with a handful of items on surveys, and then we take a score from responses to those items. And what we found from 2010 to 2021, that this was flat across time. So it doesn't seem to be the case that either specific beliefs are going up across the board, or that the general disposition towards these ideas are going up across the board. Most things seem to be fairly flat. So the narrative again is this, that social media is driving beliefs, is driving behavior. We don't seem to be finding evidence that beliefs are increasing. So what's going on? So if you think about the argument that says, social media is driving all of these beliefs and then non-normative behaviors, we have this model in our head that's something like this. You have a bunch of nice people, and then they go to the internet, and then all of a sudden we get stuck with people like this. They're sort of transformed after they fall down the internet rabbit hole. And you can see this expressed in a whole lot of headlines. QAnon believer kills family, and it sort of reduces the person to just, the only thing about them is this one belief and nothing about them, even if they have severe untreated mental illness, really matters to how they're behaving. So one thing that we find in the research is that the amount of social media people use is clearly correlated with the amount of conspiracy theories they believe. And it's also correlated with some of the bad behaviors that they're engaged in too. So for example, people who use a lot of social media tend to be less likely to be vaccinated. Right, but correlation is not causation. And oftentimes what's going on is that people are self-selecting into information that they want online. So oftentimes people have a belief, they go online to get stuff to tell them that their belief is correct. So if anything, it sort of solidifies their belief or gives them comfort in the belief they have, but it's not necessarily persuading them of something that they weren't already either believing or strongly inclined to believe to begin with. So if we go further from just, is the social media driving beliefs and conspiracy theories, but is it driving non-normative behaviors? Well, behaviors are very hard to predict, and oftentimes they are the product of numerous things, not just social media and not just a belief. Oftentimes what the literature is showing now is that people with antisocial and non-normative psychological traits, people who already dislike minorities, are going to the internet and acting like who they are in real life, and they're seeking out things that tell them what they already believe about the world. So while it's true that media use and beliefs and behaviors are clearly associated with each other, simply removing social media use or just getting rid of a particular belief isn't necessarily going to change the person, because they still likely have a bunch of personality traits and other beliefs and dispositions that are probably driving not so good behaviors. So recent examples I could give: during the early part of the pandemic, there's a woman who went to a Target and trashed the mask aisle because she supposedly had fallen for all sorts of conspiracy theories. As it turns out, even though the news coverage was blaming QAnon for her behavior, and I'm sure that had something to do with it, she was also isolated. I think had been diagnosed with some psychopathologies, and had some financial problems due to losing her job. So there were a whole bunch of things going on that drove the outburst, not just falling for a conspiracy theory. There was a person who killed their two children in California, I think a year ago. And the headlines focused on the belief in QAnon, but when you study the case further, you find the person was very mentally disturbed. This person pictured here killed a mafia crime boss in New York, supposedly because of QAnon, but he's not going to stand trial for his crimes because he's not mentally competent to do so. So it wasn't just the QAnon, it was probably some bit of that combined with serious mental illness. And then more recently, we had a guy attack the Capitol wearing horns and furs. He's in jail. If you hear how he talks about things and what his lawyer has divulged about him, it's clear that the person had more going on than just a belief in voter fraud or QAnon. There was a whole bunch of things going on with this fella. So oftentimes it's more something like this, where people who sort of might not have the best of intentions or might not have the best beliefs are going online, and they're that same person once they get online. And a lot of the bad things we see online are from people who are not that great in real life, unfortunately. So why the disjuncture between the narratives that we're getting and what a lot of the evidence is starting to show? Well, it's easy for mainstream media outlets to blame social media. A lot of these legacy media outlets don't like social media. They're a competitor for them. Journalists in general have long believed in what I might call hypodermic needle theories of media influence, where people just go online, they see something, and then they automatically believe it. That it doesn't really work that way. I mean, there are of course some people that are influenced by things online, but most people just don't believe everything they see. Yeah, this idea seems to pervade how we think about these current problems. Should also know that there's been a long line of tech panics. You could find the same things that we're saying about social media nowadays, about the printing press, radio, TV, cable TV. People in my space now, 15 years ago, were really concerned about cable. And now a lot of those researchers are looking at social media. So it's always whatever's the new thing is going to get the attention. But overall, there seems to be just a lack of focus on people and their agency and what baggage people bring with them. So even when we listen to the news media, and even if we were to take them at face value, what we find is they don't even have their story straight. Right. So sometimes they'll say 9/11 ushered in the new era of conspiracy theories, but no way it was Sandy Hook that ushered in the new era of conspiracy theories. No way it was Parkland that did it. No way it's the pandemic that gave us that. So there's always a new era of conspiracy theories, it seems. But if you look further back in time at headlines, this is what you find. I mean, 2018 was a highly conspiratorial year, according to Vox. Daily Star, this is the year of conspiracy theories in 2017. 2013, we're a conspiracy nation, according to the New York Times. 2011, New York Daily News, conspiracy theories have never lodged this deeply in the American psyche. 2010, now is a period of fashionable conspiracism. 2004, now is the golden age of conspiracy theory. 1994, now is the dawn of a new age of conspiracy theory. Of course, the Washington Post corrected itself because only 3 years prior, they said we were then living in the golden age of conspiracy theory. 1977, we've become as conspiratorial as the Pan-Slav nationalists from the 1870s. I don't even know what that means, but I don't know how they can draw that comparison either. 1964, they've grown weed-like in this country and abroad. So journalists are always saying, now is the time, now is the apex. So what's the good and bad news? I'll give you the good news first, and that is, in terms of conspiracy theories, things aren't necessarily getting worse, especially when it's related to the public's beliefs. The bad news is things have always been this bad. Many of these conspiracy theories have close to majority belief, and if not close to majority, at least a sizable minority. So a lot of people believe things that probably aren't true, and a lot of people believe things that scapegoat and target vulnerable minorities. These beliefs don't necessarily lead to bad action, but they could, and sometimes they do. So we always have to be careful and vigilant. And I guess to take it a little bit further, it's important to know that there isn't one thing to scapegoat. You know, if we got rid of social media yesterday or today, it's not going to change everyone's conspiracy theory beliefs. I mean, there's a complex array of factors that's driving what people believe and how they act. And a lot of those things don't have that much to do with social media. So things were never really good when it comes to conspiracy theories, at least as far as we can tell. There were always hate groups and always dubious beliefs, and we never did much about it. I guess what's good now is that we're paying more attention to it and we are looking for solutions, whereas in previous decades, we were just carting it off, chalking it up to being, oh, that's on the fringe and just ignore it. I think in some ways we can't ignore it now because some of our politicians in this country and in other countries have decided to build coalitions with people who are very prone to conspiracy theorizing. And that has given those people sort of a prominent space in our politics, whereas in previous years, they would have been sort of distributed throughout the fringes and not paid very much attention to. So if I was to put a lot of blame on any group of people for our current situation, it would probably be on political elites for trying to mobilize people using conspiracy theories. So with that, thank you very much, and I will be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Joe, for that. That was fantastic, and you covered a heck of a lot in a very short period of time. So I'm thankful for that. I'm going to encourage people. I see there are a lot of questions, and I have some of my own too. But people, please continue to populate them in, and I will get it through as many as I can. One sort of basic one, I suspect this person is not alone, wanted to know a little bit more about what is QAnon. So could you describe QAnon a bit?
So QAnon is I guess, a group that started in late 2017 on an anonymous chat room. I think it was 4chan, with somebody posting anonymously saying that they were working for the Department of Energy with top secret clearance, and that they were working with Trump against the deep state. And that Trump had been installed as president by the military so that he could go and root out the deep state, which really controls the country. And that this deep state was engaged in a mass sex trafficking ring and were also eating babies for magical powers. The person doing these anonymous posts wound up being given the name Q because supposedly they had high-level Q clearance in the government. And they would put out garbled messages on anonymous chat boards that followers could then go and try to decode to try and figure out what these messages meant.
Great, thank you. So another one is going to underscore your point that this precedes social media and cable news and even the printing press, perhaps in some ways too, about conspiracy theories as being ideas rather than just a medium in which they're delivered. So somebody said they read recently a book about the Black Death that went into depth about the conspiracy theories around it. What's the oldest widely known conspiracy theory?
I don't know if I can say the oldest. I'm sure somebody might be able to find something in, that goes further back. But the oldest that I tend to deal with are ones having to do with Jewish people.
Yeah, and that's one of the essential things about anti-Semitism. It's conspiracy theories about Jews trying to harm non-Jews and giving explanations for what goes wrong in the world. So another question is, what was the diversity of the 2000 survey about age, religion, region, skin color? So if you have any more information about the diversity of that survey that you said.
Yeah, so I peg all my surveys to census demographics on race, age, sex, income, education, and race. So we get samples that look pretty close to what the country looks like as a whole.
Great, thank you. Another is there a relationship, and if so, what is it, between the area of the country and conspiracy theories?
That I don't know yet. So I'm sure that people tend to believe what's relevant to them, and people from different regions of the country are probably going to believe different things because they see different things every day. They have different issues on their mind. I will say I polled in Florida, because that's where I live, and of course, Floridians are happy to conspiracy theorize about Fidel Castro and things that concern Floridians, and Disney too, because that's something they like to conspiracy theorize about. But in terms of, can I tell you, state by state, probably not, because Florida's the only place where I tend to focus on state level beliefs.
Great, thank you. I have a question too. I mean, you didn't mention specifically, although you did at the end about politicians. The Trump's promoting the big lie of the election being stolen and all the various different subplots of that. And Republican officials in particular who have really not debunked that because they saw it, at least in my view, to their political advantage, to not go against somebody who's seen as so important for their electoral success. So does that create if you agree with me that that's a conspiracy theory, does that create the environment where these other conspiracy theories become more palatable because that one's being promoted by leadership?
That I don't know, but the answer is probably not, because we're not finding across the board increases in other things at the same time. What I would say is this: it's pretty normal for the losing side to believe that or for at least a pretty big chunk of the losing side to think they were cheated. That's very regular. So I've been polling pre and post presidential elections on this question since 2012. And going into elections, both sides think that equally. If the other side wins, it will probably have been due to fraud. Both sides have their own conspiracy theories about what's going to go wrong in the election. I mean, majority of Republicans in October 2020 thought that mail-in ballots were going to be fraud. But at the same time, a majority of Democrats thought that the post office at Trump's behest was going to be stealing the ballots, not delivering them. So both sides get their cackles up and think that something bad is going to happen. It's just like sports, right? Who complains afterward? It's the losing team, not the winners. The winners think everything's hunky-dory. So after every election, there's a pretty big chunk of the losing side that thinks it was rigged against them. So the fact that Republicans think it was rigged is not shocking. It's completely, I'm not going to say it's good, but it's completely normal compared to past elections. Now, what's different this time is you don't normally have the sitting president, now former president, and their allies in Congress and in the conservative media sphere, the partisan media sphere, saying over and over and over again that it was rigged. So instead of just being a belief that most elites disavow, and it's sort of just left to people to believe sort of on their own because they're upset they lost, here it's just become just another partisan belief, just another part of the Republican platform, because most of the leaders are, or I don't know if it's all the leaders, but quite a few of the leaders are saying it repeatedly. So if you're just a Republican, who pays moderate attention and you're getting these cues, it's quite reasonable for you to think that it indeed was rigged, because the president, senators, the radio host, the TV shows that you watch, maybe even your congressperson are all saying it was rigged. So that's created this information environment where it's just another political message. And that's why you get between 50 and 80% of Republicans now, depending when you poll and how you ask it, thinking that 2020 was rigged by Biden.
That's helpful. To be interesting, at some point to see if the people that believe that are more likely to believe other conspiratorial thinking too. I know you're talking about broadly about the numbers are not going up, but it's an interesting point. Another person asked, actually two people want to see if there's a correlation between the level of education and either with conspiracy promoters or people who believe in conspiracies.
Yes, and it's pretty consistent. So that more education tends to mean less conspiracy theory beliefs and lower levels of generalized conspiracy thinking. Now, the question becomes, Um, what's the cause of that? Which direction is the causation going in? So the first thing I want to say is, I mean, that's a tendency, it's a correlation. It doesn't mean that some highly educated people aren't going to be engaging in conspiracy theories. If you doubt me, come to a faculty meeting and everyone thinks someone's out to get them. It's the administration or it's the government or whatever. So having a PhD doesn't necessarily make you immune in any sense. It could be the case, and as a educator, I would like to think that I teach people stuff, it makes them smarter, they could think better about the world, and then makes them immune to dubious ideas. I would like to think that's true, and I'm sure it is to some extent.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
It could also be the opposite case, that institutions of higher education sort of push people out who are outward conspiracy theorists, right? So if somebody came to me and said, hey, I want to study with you because I want to find out who really blew up the Twin Towers, I'm not writing that person back. Right. And it's the same, it's the same thing with income. We find the same relationship with income. More money you make, the less conspiracy theories you believe. And it could be the case that just making more money makes you more comfortable. So obviously people, you know, aren't out to get us and keeping us down because we're doing so well. On the other hand, jobs that pay a lot aren't necessarily going to hire outward conspiracy theorists. Are you going to hire a person to manage your hedge fund if they think that the Jews control the stock market? You may not hire that person if that's the first thing they say to you, right? So the causation could be going in both directions.
Thank you. And related to education, one question is with Florida being against college teaching on many subjects, how does that impact what you're teaching in your school?
I'm not at a state school, and I have tenure at a private university, so I'm fairly well protected from that sort of stuff. But I share common cause with other professors across this state who have been censored in numerous ways. I mean, we're all hearing about, the race stuff and things having to do with gay and trans issues. But this has been going on for some time with this governor, where he has stopped state school professors from lending their expertise to court cases about voter disenfranchisement. So there is sort of a multi-pronged, to me anyway, it seems like there's a multi-pronged assault on academic freedom going on.
Thank you. Question, decades ago, we had the famous essay published by Richard Hofstadter in Harper's in 1964, The Paranoid Style in American Politics. Is the substance expressed back then all that different from today?
It's hard to know because whenever I compare anything to the pre-polling era, I'm usually, all of that history is very episodic. Like Hofstadter was looking, I mean, he looked at a few episodes, but he was most focused on sort of right-wing groups in the early 1960s in the wake of the Red Scare. But there have been other similar writings like that, and in that same time period by historians, where they were looking at maybe the Salem witch trials or the Freemason freakout of the 1830s and 40s, or the Illuminati panic, or whatever in the past. So it's hard to say, does the data I'm gathering now sort of match with what they're saying then? It's hard to make those comparisons. What I can say is that some of what he says sort of holds true, and that there is a style by some people. And certainly we find that reasoning style, that paranoid style, among people who are on the fringes of political thought. But, at the same time, we find it among mainstream partisans to some extent. We find it among independents. So it exists, it's there, he identified it. But I think the things that we're able to do now with more, with polling and experimentation and tracking what's on the internet, we're able to get a little more fine-grained than some of the historical scholarship.
Right, thank you. And, I guess related to that, one question I wanted to ask you is, I presume you read the story a few months ago in the Times about in Germany, there was this conspiracy to topple the government that it was going to put in this person that had a bloodline to the form of German royalty. Um, and the basis of that seemed to me to be that these folks believed that the formation of the post-war government was all done behind the scenes, was illegitimate, that they were actually connected to the longtime sovereignty in Germany years ago, and they were expressing that now by their conspiracy theory to go and topple the government, which struck me as very similar to what I was seeing in the militias in the 90s. And the reason I raise that is there a difference that you see when people believe conspiracy theories that have a combination of telling them where their rightful place is in society and a belief that that was taken away and combined with politics versus like, the COVID ones or the JFK ones, the alien ones? Is there a difference of how those manifest?
I can't say for certain and that it's across the board, but I will say, yeah, we do find some differences with some of them, right? So for example, the idea that white people are being replaced purposefully with non-white people. I mean, that's attached to a lot of non-normative beliefs and intentions and behaviors, right? It's an animating idea in and of itself that your race is going to be wiped off the planet, and that some group of people are engineering this, right? I mean, that could drive somebody to want to act, right? And we already know it's the case that just when you there's been a few studies on this, when you tell samples of white people that they're going to be a numerical minority, they tend to react in not necessarily great ways about it. They express higher levels of resentment or whatnot. But just to put a bow on that, I mean, not all conspiracy theories are created equal. There are some, people who believe whatever because they interest them or they're cute or whatnot, and they're never going to do anything bad, and they don't mean anyone harm, and it's not going to lead them to commit violence. I mean, there's a lot of people who like watching the night sky for aliens, and the majority of those folks are entirely harmless. But there are other conspiracy theories where they seem to be adopted by people who have non-normative traits to them, right? So the person who thinks that, oh yeah, I think aliens landed in Roswell, is often a very different person than the one who thinks that the Holocaust was faked. Those are different people with different traits, right? So it's not just that they each happen to slip on a banana peel, get exposed to those ideas and adopt them. I mean, they tend to be on average different people.
Great, thank you. And I guess one final question that struck me as interesting when you were beginning and talking about the Great Replacement theory, which, as I suspect many in the audience, know is really not that much different from classic anti-Semitism, right?
Yeah.
In the sense that it believes that Jews are conspiring behind the scenes to harm Jewish folks and replacing them in society, replacing white folks, replacing Christians, and so forth. So it's a newer manifestation, like social media is a newer manifestation of the delivery system. This is a new packaging of an old idea. But what struck me is really interesting in that was that the high correlation you showed with people that you described as thinking that the country's too feminine. And I remember reading some things about supporters of Trump, including women, who were sort of drawn to the idea that, whatever else you didn't think about him, here was a strong person standing up, macho, all that type of stuff. So how does that feel of too feminine play into the conspiratorial thinking?
We're not entirely sure at this point, but what we do know is that it is those gendered views are predictive of conspiracy theorizing in some instances. For Trump, I mean, I've done quite a bit of work trying to understand why people support Trump and other politicians too, but Trump is a fairly interesting case because he wasn't appealing to regular conservatism or republicanism. He appealed to a bunch of other things. Conspiracism was one, populism was another. It's like Washington, D.C. is completely corrupt. We need to drain the swamp, and only an outsider who's not been corrupted by the swamp can come in and do it. And also his rhetoric towards racial minorities, women, and immigrants were all a part of this too, right? So are those things all related in public opinion surveys? Yes, they tend to be, right? So, I mean, that's what Trump's rhetoric was, so it shouldn't be a shock that it was people with those sorts of dispositions that his rhetoric appealed most to.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, we're at the end of the hour, and I just want to thank you again, Joe, for spending the hour with us and educating us. And thank everybody who participated. And I'm sorry I didn't get to all your questions, but there'll be other times. Hate is not going to go away, and we're going to be back next month talking about some other aspects of hate. So thank you, Joe. Everybody have a good rest of your day. Take care, and thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.